I used to live in a crumbling old apartment complex just outside of Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't the nicest place, but rent was cheap, and at the time, that was all I cared about. My unit was on the third floor, number 6A. Right next to me was 6B, and that's where I first met my neighbor, a middle-aged man named Richard. Richard was odd. Not in a loud or aggressive way, but the kind of odd that makes your stomach tighten, like you've noticed something wrong but can't put your finger on it. He was polite enough when we first met, thin smile, quick handshake, but his eyes lingered too long. The way he studied me felt like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. I figured maybe he was just lonely. The building wasn't exactly a social place, most people kept to themselves. But Richard? He seemed to thrive in the shadows between interactions. He always just happened to be in the hallway when I came home, or on the balcony when I stepped out for air. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then the noises started. Every night, around 2 or 3 a.m., I'd hear something dragging across the floor in his apartment. Slow, scraping sounds, like furniture being pulled. Sometimes it was heavier, like a thud, followed by muffled movement. Once, I swore I heard whispering. I pressed my ear to the wall, but the voices stopped the second I did. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I knocked on his door under the excuse of asking for some sugar. He opened it only a crack, just enough for his pale face to peek out. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of his apartment. And it was empty. Completely empty. No couch, no table, no pictures, no clutter, nothing but bare walls and a single chair in the middle of the living room. "Sorry, I don't cook much," he muttered, shutting the door before I could ask anything else. I didn't sleep much that night. A week later, something strange happened. I came home late from work and found an envelope slipped under my door. No address, no name, just my apartment number written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single photograph. It was me. Taken through my own blinds. My hands shook as I flipped the photo over. On the back, scrawled in that same shaky handwriting, were 3 words. "I see you." I called the landlord immediately, furious, demanding to know if he'd given my info to Richard. But the landlord hesitated and said something that chilled me more than the photo itself. "Richard? You must be mistaken. Apartment 6B's been vacant for over a year." I snapped back at him, told him I'd met Richard, talked to him, seen him in the hall. But the landlord insisted. No one had renewed that lease after the last tenant left. The unit was supposedly locked and empty. I didn't believe him, so I decided to check myself. That night, when I was sure Richard was inside, I could hear that dragging sound again. I crept into the hallway. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it would give me away. I grabbed the doorknob to 6B. It turned easily. The door swung open without resistance. And he was right. The apartment was empty. Dust coated the floor, untouched for months, maybe years. No chair. No sign of anyone living there. Just silence and shadows. Then I noticed something in the far corner. A small pile of photographs. Dozens of them. Every single one, of me. Some were taken in the hallway. Some while I was sleeping, my curtains slightly parted. Some even of me showering, though I'd never noticed a hole or gap in my bathroom wall. And the last one, the one that made my stomach drop, was of me standing right there, in that apartment, staring at the pile of photos. Taken only seconds before. I froze. The air around me felt heavy, pressing down on my chest. I spun around, expecting to see him behind me. But the apartment was empty. The door was still wide open. I backed out slowly, shaking, clutching the photo in my hand. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, the door slammed shut. Hard. I stumbled back into my own unit, locked every bolt, and sat awake until dawn with every light on. When I finally built up the courage the next morning, I returned with the landlord and a maintenance guy. They opened the door to 6B. It was still empty. The pile of photos? Gone. Not a single trace left. The landlord swore up and down no one had access to that unit. The locks hadn't been changed, no records of entry, nothing. That night, exhausted, I tried to convince myself it had all been some kind of dream, a stress-induced hallucination. But then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it again. The dragging sound. Only this time, it was coming from my ceiling. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside of Denver, Colorado. The kind of place where kids rode their bikes until dark, neighbors waved from their porches, and everyone supposedly knew everyone. But there was one person nobody ever seemed to know, the woman across the street. Her house was a pale yellow one-story, always with the blinds drawn. For years, I never saw anyone come in or out. My parents told me an elderly woman lived there, but she kept to herself. Still, sometimes, late at night, I'd see a figure in the upstairs window, just standing there, silhouetted against the faint glow of a lamp. I used to wave. She never waved back. When I was 13, curiosity got the better of me. One afternoon, when I saw her walking slowly down her driveway with a cane, I crossed the street and said hello. Up close, she was even stranger. Her face looked wrong. Not disfigured exactly, but like the proportions weren't quite human. Her eyes were too far apart, her mouth too wide. She smiled politely, but it stretched too much, like she was imitating an expression she didn't quite understand. Still, she spoke kindly, asking about school and my parents. Her voice was soft, almost melodic. I felt uneasy, but I didn't want to be rude, so I stood there and chatted until she excused herself and went back inside. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. and glanced out my window. She was standing in her yard. Not moving. Not looking around. Just staring straight up, at my bedroom window. The next day, I asked my mom about her. My mom frowned and said, "Sweetheart, nobody lives in that house. It's been vacant since the Johnsons moved out 10 years ago." I thought she was joking, but her expression stayed serious. Later, I asked my dad. He gave me the same answer, nobody lived there. He even laughed it off, saying maybe I'd seen a squatter or some kids messing around. But that night, she was there again. Same spot in the yard. Same unblinking stare. I didn't sleep. Weeks passed, and I tried to ignore her. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of her face peeking through the blinds. Sometimes I'd wake to find her shadow standing at the very edge of my driveway, like she was inching closer every night. I stopped telling my parents because they just dismissed it. But I started keeping a journal, documenting every time I saw her. Each night, the entries got longer. 3:15 a.m., in her yard again. 3:18 a.m., closer to the curb. 3:22 a.m., standing in the street. 3:30 a.m., right at the edge of my yard. Then one night, I woke to scratching. At my window. I froze, too scared to move. Slowly, I turned my head, and there she was. Her face was pressed against the glass from the outside, her eyes wide, her mouth stretched into that same unnatural smile. I screamed. My dad rushed in, flicked on the lights, and I pointed frantically at the window. But when he pulled back the curtains, nothing. Just an empty yard. My parents chalked it up to a nightmare. But I knew what I saw. Fast forward a few years, I went off to college, and my parents eventually sold the house. I didn't think much about her after that. It felt like a bad dream from childhood, something I'd outgrown. Until last summer. I was visiting my aunt in another town, hours away from where I grew up. She lived in a quiet cul-de-sac, nice little neighborhood. My first night there, I stepped outside to grab something from my car. That's when I saw it. Across the street, in the upstairs window of a house with the blinds drawn, a faint lamp glowed. And silhouetted in the glass, was her. Same wide smile. Same too far apart eyes. Staring straight at me. When I first moved into the duplex, I didn't even know there was a basement apartment. My unit was the top floor, and the landlord told me the lower level was storage only. It made sense, the staircase to the basement was locked off, and there were no windows on that side of the house. But after a few weeks, I started noticing little things that didn't add up. Like the sound of footsteps beneath my floor at night. Or the faint smell of cigarette smoke drifting up through the vents, even though I didn't smoke. And sometimes, a soft humming, like someone singing under their breath. At first, I thought maybe the landlord had lied and was renting the basement to someone without telling me. But when I asked, he shook his head. No one lives down there. Trust me. That space isn't even livable. I wanted to believe him. But the noises didn't stop. One night, I was lying in bed when I heard a knock. Not at my front door, at the floorboards. 3 slow knocks, coming from right beneath me. I froze. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe pipes, maybe the house settling. But then it came again. 3 knocks. Deliberate. I whispered, "Hello," without even thinking. Silence. Then, clear as day, a voice whispered back through the floor. "Hello." After that, things escalated. Every night, I'd hear movement downstairs, shuffling, dragging, that eerie humming. Sometimes, the voice would whisper my name through the vents. Once, when I was showering, the steam made the bathroom mirror fog up. And in the condensation, letters slowly formed from the inside out. "I can see you." I ran out, dripping wet, shaking. I knew someone had to be down there. But how? The basement was supposed to be sealed. I confronted the landlord again. This time he got defensive. "Look, I told you. Nobody's down there. Don't go snooping, all right?" That only made me more suspicious. So one night, I decided to check for myself. I grabbed a flashlight and went around the back of the house. Sure enough, hidden behind a row of bushes, there was a small rusted door, half buried into the ground. A basement entrance. The lock was old, flimsy. One good shove, and it snapped open. The smell hit me first. Damp, mold, and something sour underneath it all. The stairs creaked as I made my way down, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. At the bottom, I found a narrow hallway leading into a single room. And it was lived in. A dirty mattress lay on the floor, surrounded by piles of empty food containers. Candle wax pooled in jars. On the far wall, dozens of photographs were taped up, pictures of me. Me leaving for work, me checking my mail, me sleeping in my bed. I nearly dropped the flashlight. That's when I heard it. A low chuckle. From the shadows, a man stepped forward. His clothes hung off him like rags, his face pale and gaunt, eyes wide with excitement. "You finally came down," he whispered, smiling. "I've been waiting for you." I bolted. I don't even remember climbing the stairs, I just know I slammed the door shut and sprinted back to my car. I drove until morning before calling the cops. When they investigated, the basement was empty. The mattress, the food containers, the photos, gone. Like no one had ever been there. The police told me maybe I'd stumbled across an old squatter who cleared out before they arrived. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. That night, when I finally returned home, exhausted and terrified, I crawled into bed. And as I closed my eyes, I heard it again. 3 knocks. From under the floor. I'd just moved into a quiet cul-de-sac in Portland, Oregon. It was one of those peaceful neighborhoods where everyone waved at each other and kids played basketball in their driveways. For the first few weeks, I felt like I'd finally found a safe, normal place to live. Then my new neighbor moved in. He was a quiet guy, maybe late 30s, with sharp features and a way of speaking that felt rehearsed, like every sentence was practiced. The first time I met him, he introduced himself as Cal, no last name. Just Cal. But what stood out wasn't him. It was his dog. A massive black dog, bigger than any I'd ever seen, with eyes that glowed strangely even in daylight. When I asked what breed it was, he just smiled thinly and said, "She's older than you think." I laughed nervously, figuring it was a joke. But the way he said it made my skin crawl. From the start, the dog made everyone uncomfortable. It never barked, never wagged its tail, never acted like a normal animal. It just stared. Every time I stepped outside, it was there, sitting perfectly still in the yard, its eyes locked on me. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night to hear low growling outside my bedroom window, and when I looked, its shadow would be standing there in the moonlight. The strangest part? Nobody else seemed to notice. I asked one of my other neighbors about it, an older woman who lived 2 houses down. She gave me a confused look. "Dog? Cal doesn't have a dog, sweetheart. He lives alone." I thought maybe she was mistaken, until I pressed further. But she swore she'd never seen a dog there. Not once. One evening, I decided to test it. I walked across the street while Cal was in his yard. The dog sat beside him, staring at me. "Beautiful animal," I said carefully. "What did you say her name was?" Cal's smile widened, almost too wide. "She doesn't have one. But she likes you." I glanced down. The dog's lips had curled back just enough to show teeth. I excused myself quickly and went back inside. That night, I woke up to scratching at my front door. Long, slow scratches, like claws dragging down wood. When I peeked through the peephole, my stomach dropped. The dog was standing there. Alone. No Cal. The next morning, I confronted Cal. I told him his dog had wandered to my house at night. He tilted his head and frowned. "My dog?" I nodded. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You saw her too?" Before I could respond, he smiled again. "Don't worry. She only comes for the one she chooses." 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of heavy breathing in my bedroom. I turned my head slowly. The dog was there. Inside. Sitting in the corner of the room. Watching me. I scrambled for the light, but when it flicked on, the corner was empty. No open doors. No broken windows. Nothing disturbed. Except for the floor. Deep claw marks had been scratched into the hardwood, inches from where I slept. When I was in grad school, I rented a small, cheap apartment in an old converted boarding house near Chicago. The building had 6 units total, with thin walls and creaky floors, but the rent was unbeatable. My neighbor, in the unit directly next to mine, was a man named Gerald. Gerald wasn't friendly, but he wasn't hostile either. We exchanged polite nods in the hallway and sometimes small talk about the weather. But there was one thing about him everyone in the building whispered about: his locked room. Every tenant had a small 2-bedroom setup. But Gerald's 2nd bedroom door was always shut. Always locked. Never opened. At first, I didn't think much of it. Lots of people have storage rooms. But the longer I lived there, the harder it was to ignore the strange sounds coming from that room. Late at night, I'd hear muffled voices, like multiple people talking in hushed tones. Sometimes, I'd hear scratching, like nails dragging across wood. Once, I even heard what sounded like crying. When I asked Gerald about it, he stiffened. His normally calm face turned cold. "You must have been dreaming," he said, before quickly changing the subject. "One night, around 1 a.m., I came home late from the library. As I climbed the stairs, I saw Gerald's apartment door was slightly open. The lights were off inside. Something in me said I should just keep walking. But curiosity, it won. I pushed the door open a little further and whispered his name. No response. That's when I noticed the locked room. The door was ajar. For the first time since I'd moved in, it wasn't sealed shut. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first, damp, metallic, and sour, like rotting meat. The room was nearly empty, except for a chair in the center and long deep scratches covering the walls, floor, even the ceiling, as if something had been desperately clawing to get out. And in the corner was a mirror. Not hanging, just leaning against the wall. Its surface was dark, clouded, almost like smoke was trapped inside the glass. As I moved closer, my stomach tightened. My reflection wasn't right. It lagged slightly behind my movements, like it was struggling to keep up. And then, it smiled. I hadn't. I stumbled back, heart racing, just as I heard Gerald's voice behind me. "You shouldn't be in here." I spun around. He was standing in the doorway, his face pale with fury. But before I could speak, he slammed the door shut and locked it. I was trapped. The mirror's surface began to ripple, like water. My reflection leaned forward, pressing its hand against the glass. Only it wasn't a reflection anymore. The hand pushed through. It was coming out. The next thing I remember, I woke up in my own bed, drenched in sweat, the morning sun streaming through my blinds. My door was locked from the inside, just as I'd left it the night before. I told myself it had to be a nightmare, until I saw the scratches. Long, deep gouges carved into the inside of my bedroom door. And faintly, when I pressed my ear to the wall between Gerald's apartment and mine, I heard it. My own voice. Whispering. From the other side. When I bought my first house in a small Pennsylvania town, I felt like I'd finally made it. It wasn't big, just a modest 2-story fixer-upper, but it was mine. The best part was the next-door neighbor, Mrs. Palmer, an older widow who welcomed me with cookies the day I moved in. She was sweet, chatty, and always seemed happy to have someone new on the block. She told me stories about her late husband, about the history of the street, even about my house. "Funny thing," she said with a chuckle, "no one seems to stay in that place very long. People move out after a year or two. I guess it's just not comfortable." I thought nothing of it at the time. But after a few weeks, I started noticing strange things. Objects weren't where I'd left them. My TV would turn on in the middle of the night, volume low, tuned to static. Sometimes, I'd come home to find muddy footprints leading from the back door into the living room, always stopping just before the stairs. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was tired, distracted, forgetting things. But one night, I caught something that proved otherwise. I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of humming. It was faint, coming from downstairs. I crept down, my heart pounding, and found the living room empty, except for the reflection in the darkened TV screen. A woman. Standing right behind me. When I spun around, no one was there. I told Mrs. Palmer about it the next day, half joking, half hoping she'd reassure me. But instead of laughing, her face went pale. "You saw her, didn't you?" she whispered. My stomach dropped. "Saw who?" She leaned closer. "The woman who used to live in your house. She never left." I thought she meant figuratively, but the fear in her eyes told me otherwise. That night, I locked every door, every window. I left the lights on and tried to sleep. Sometime after midnight, the humming started again. Louder this time. I pulled the blanket over my head like a scared child, but it didn't help. Because I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming up the stairs. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, praying, waiting. After what felt like forever, silence returned. The next morning, the footprints were back. Only this time, they didn't stop at the stairs. They led all the way to my bedroom door. I tried everything, sage, priests, even a paranormal team. They found nothing conclusive. Sometimes spirits just linger, one of them said. You may just have to learn to live with her. But I can't. Because last week, I woke up to find muddy footprints inside my room. And when I rolled over, half asleep, I saw her. A woman with long, dripping hair, lying beside me in bed. Her wide, lifeless eyes staring straight into mine. And she was humming. When I was 16, my parents moved us to a rural town in upstate New York. Our new house was isolated, tucked away at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by thick forest. The closest neighbor was about half a mile away, a man named Mr. Harlow. From the first day, my mom warned me, don't go wandering into Harlow's property. He doesn't like visitors. I didn't need convincing. Even from a distance, his house looked wrong. The windows were boarded from the inside, smoke poured from a crooked chimney at all hours, and at night, strange lights flickered through the trees, like lanterns moving back and forth. But curiosity is stronger than fear, especially for a teenager. One evening, while biking down the road, I spotted him. He was standing at the tree line, motionless, staring right at me. Long, tangled hair, clothes hanging off his thin frame. I lifted my hand in a nervous wave. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stared. I pedaled home fast. That night, I woke to the sound of something tapping against my window. My bedroom was on the second floor, so it couldn't have been branches. When I pulled back the curtain, my heart nearly stopped. Mr. Harlow was standing in my yard. Looking up. Smiling. I screamed for my dad, but by the time he rushed in, the yard was empty. For weeks after, I felt like I was being watched. I'd catch glimpses of him in the woods when I left for school, half hidden behind trees. Once, while walking our dog, I found crude stick figures tied to branches, all facing our house. And then came the night I'll never forget. Around midnight, I heard voices outside. Low chanting, dozens of them. I peeked through the blinds and saw a line of lanterns moving through the woods, headed straight for our house. At the front of the procession was Mr. Harlow. My parents and I locked every door, every window. But the chanting grew louder, surrounding us. We huddled in the living room, clutching each other, listening to the rhythmic hum echo through the forest. Then, silence. I thought maybe they'd gone. But when I glanced out the front window, I saw him. Standing alone in our driveway. Holding something. It was a bundle of sticks tied together with rope. And hanging from it, was a Polaroid. A picture of me, taken from inside my room. The next morning, the yard was empty. No lanterns, no chanting, no sign of Harlow. We packed up and left within the week. Years later, I looked up that town out of morbid curiosity. There's no record of a man named Harlow ever living there. No property records, no death certificates. Nothing. But sometimes, when I drive down wooded roads at night, I swear I see him in my headlights. Standing at the tree line. Smiling. When I was in college, I rented a cheap room in a house shared with 3 other people. The house itself was old, with slanted floors and pipes that clanged at night, but the rent was unbeatable. The weirdest part was the neighbor next door. An older man named Frank. He lived alone, kept to himself, and never spoke more than a few words. But the house had one shared feature, a basement with an old stone door that technically belonged to him, but the hallway to it was accessible from our side, too. We were told to never go down there. At first, I didn't think much of it. But late at night, I'd sometimes hear noises through the floor. Not just creaks, voices. Low, muffled conversations, almost like chanting. My roommates claimed they heard it too. One of them joked that Frank must be running a secret poker game. But the tone of those voices was never playful. It was rhythmic. Rehearsed. Then, one night, I made a mistake. I had just come home late from work, and I saw that the stone doors to the basement were open. I should have ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. I crept down the stairs quietly, using my phone as a flashlight. The basement smelled like damp earth and rust. The air was heavy, almost choking. I expected to see junk or storage, but instead, I saw dozens of old photographs pinned to the walls. Photos of people. Men, women, children, all taken from behind trees, through windows, across streets. Every single one was being watched. And in the middle of the wall, a photo of me. Taken through my bedroom window. I ran. I didn't stop until I was upstairs, slamming my door shut. My roommates thought I was joking when I told them. But the next morning, the stone doors were locked tight. None of us mentioned it again. A week later, one of my roommates vanished. We assumed he left suddenly. He'd been flaky before, but his stuff was still in his room. The police did a wellness check, but nothing came of it. That night, I heard the chanting again. Stronger this time. I pressed my ear to the floor and froze. Among the voices, I heard my missing roommate screaming for help. I moved out the next day. 2 months later, the house burned down in an unexplained fire. Frank was never seen again. But sometimes, I wonder if he moved somewhere else. And if right now, someone else is hearing voices in their basement. When I was a kid, my family lived in a quiet cul-de-sac in Ohio. All the houses were nearly identical, except the one across from us. It looked normal during the day, well-kept lawn, curtains always drawn, a single porch light that stayed on 24/7. But no one ever saw who lived there. No cars, no deliveries, no movement. My parents said someone must own it, but I never saw them. None of us did. Yet at night, things were different. I'd sometimes wake up around 3 a.m. and see lights flickering in the windows across the street. Not the warm glow of lamps, but cold, bluish flashes, like old televisions. And then I started noticing the shadow. Every night, the silhouette of a man would appear behind those curtains. Perfectly still. Just standing there. Staring out at our house. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Until one night, I saw him move. The curtain shifted, just slightly, as if a hand was pulling it back. I told my parents, but they dismissed it. My dad even went over and knocked on the door once. No one answered. But the very next night, the porch light turned off for the first time. In that shadow, it stepped closer to the window. A week later, strange things began happening inside our home. Objects went missing, small things, like scissors or keys, only to reappear in odd places. My mom's wedding ring was found in the freezer. My little sister's favorite doll turned up in the attic, though none of us had been up there. Then came the photos. One morning, my dad found an envelope on our porch. Inside were Polaroids of us. Eating dinner. Watching TV. Sleeping. Taken through our windows. The last photo was of me, standing at my bedroom window, looking out at the neighbor's house. Except I had never been at that window that night. My parents called the police. They searched the house across the street, finally. And here's the thing. It was empty. No furniture. No curtains. No lights. The electricity had been shut off for years. The cops brushed it off as a prank, but we knew better. The final night before we moved, I woke up to whispering. Low, raspy voices coming from my closet. I sat frozen in bed as the door slowly creaked open. And standing inside wasn't a man. It was the same shadow from across the street. We left the next morning and never went back. I've since heard from other families who lived in that neighborhood. They all said the same thing. No matter who moves in across the street, the house always looks empty. But sooner or later, the shadow returns. And it always chooses one window to watch.